Good morning. This is the Joy of Resistance Multicultural Feminist Radio at WBAI. I am very pleased to be recording an interview with Maryam Namazie, a multi-award-winning Iranian-born campaigner and writer living in the UK. She is currently the spokesperson for One Law for All and the Council of Ex-Muslims of Britain. In 2006, Maryam signed a statement of 12 writers against Islamic totalitarianism with Salman Rushdie, Taslima Nasrin, and others. And she has also fought against stoning laws and defended refugee rights, amongst others. Maryam is Iranian-born and is one of a large group of people from Iran, Iraq, and other Middle East countries who are campaigner against it and a supporter of the Women Life Freedom movement of Iran that took place with thousands in the streets just about 2 years ago. And we are speaking with Maryam at a time when both Israel and the U.S. are bombing parts of Iran, and we don't know how far that will go. And one of the reasons I wanted to do this interview now is because I'm somewhat disturbed at this tendency of the left to go into a mode that I call the enemy of my enemy must be my friend. And that is manifesting as Iran being idealized as a society, a kind of, either or polarization, U.S. and Israel bad, therefore Iran good. And the reality is more complex. And I think it's important that as serious political activists, we can absorb, we can integrate, we can understand, we can live with complex realities. And you will hear that in this interview. So, good morning, Maryam.
Good morning. It's a lovely pleasure to be here. Thank you, as always, for having me, Fran.
You're so very welcome. First of all, how are you feeling?
Well, I think I'm feeling very similar to, I think most Iranians, is this huge concern about, of course, our family and friends, the consequences of this war, the people who are getting killed, the complete destruction, potentially, of civil society, what we've seen in Gaza is still unfolding before our eyes. There's a huge worry that, we could see it being repeated in Iran to a lesser extent, or even if so, it would be devastating, and it is. And of course, no one is crying for the regime's officials who've been killed, but there are so many civilians being killed in the process, and also clearly Israel or the U.S. governments cannot be liberators in any sense, and nothing they do will bring any sort of peace and security for people in Iran and the region. So completely worrying, and especially since the Iranian regime continues to execute, continues to arrest. It is not stopping its machinery of murder, basically. So people in Iran are getting it from both sides, as is usually the case.
Right. How would you characterize the work that you do, both in the Council of Ex-Muslims, One Law for All, etc., and you are working in the United Kingdom? Is it correct to say in exile from Iran?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the work is quite linked, to the refugee work I've done for decades, which is, supporting people who fled, but also questioning the conditions that have caused them to flee. And part of it, of course, is U.S.-led militarism in the region, but a large part is also the authoritarianism of theocratic rule in Iran. And so questioning theocracy, questioning religious rules, and how it is anti-human, but specifically and fundamentally anti-woman.
And yet, at the same time, you decry this attack that seems to be motivated by the needs of the main players, who are Netanyahu or Donald Trump, to rev up their base or Netanyahu's case, possibly to stay out of prison. Donald Trump, we cannot go to prison due to our right-wing Supreme Court that he has manufactured. That's another story. What's going on for me is I see the war drums being revved up in this country. I have already heard from my fellow leftists a kind of idealization of Iran, which it feels very familiar. It feels like we've been here before. As I said in the introduction, the enemy of my enemy must be my friend. Therefore, in the good and evil polarization, U.S. evil, Iran good. And the reality is more complex. Talk about having that position of being critical of the Iranian regime and theocracy in general in a world where yet these societies have to be defended against Western imperialism. What are some of the complexities of that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of complexity, as you mentioned earlier. I mean, the reality is that the war is something that, this confrontation between Iran, Israel, and the United States, and Iran, of course, with its allies, Hamas, Hezbollah, Russia, for example. This confrontation has had sort of hidden, it's been hidden from view, but it's been ongoing for a very long time. Definitely partly has to do with, as you said, Netanyahu wanting to stay out of prison. It has to do with the fact that after Gaza, it is clear that anything goes. There is no more rules. The pretense of having international law and human rights is completely out the window. And I do think that we are witnessing the establishment of another sort of new world order. And if you look at the historical period when capitalism was being formed, basically, you have this Marxist feminist, Silvia Federici, who talks about how the witch hunts for targeting women was something that happened during the rise of capitalism to show people what their place is, what is coming for them, and to make sure that they submit to the system that was coming into play. And I do kind of feel like we're witnessing something like that today as well. It is, the end of all masks on democracy and the fact that it's the rule of the people for the people, that rights are and human welfare is paramount. We can see that it's all about profit. And I think they haven't been making enough. And so having this perpetual state of war is very useful for profit. And I think what we're seeing in Gaza is something just so inhuman, so violent, so impossible to fathom, that it is just ongoing before our very eyes and nothing's been done to stop it. And so its continuation in Iran is, I think, quite not surprising to see, because it is possible now to do that. And given the attempts at regional supremacy between Iran and Israel, at least partly, we're seeing that this fight is carrying out in ways that, of course, are devastating, particularly for civilians, for civilian infrastructures, for the peace and security and welfare of the population in the region. So obviously I'm one of those people that are against both US-led militarism and Islamist militarism. I see them as two sides of the same coin. I think it is absurd to think that one is better than the other. And I think, particularly if you look at Iran's role in the region, it is also an imperialist force in the region. It has intervened in Syria, in Iraq, in Lebanon, in Yemen. I mean, it is a regional imperialist force as well.
Yeah.
And so to kind of not see that it also has such detrimental results for consequences for people in the region, but also particularly, I mean, we're talking about Sharia law and a theocracy. You have a lot of leftists who wear Handmaid's Tale outfits and oppose, for example, the banning or the restriction of abortion laws in various states in the U.S. Can they not make the connection that this has been the reality of the lives of women in Iran for the past over 40 years? and religion has intervened in every aspect of women's lives. To be a woman is a crime in Iran. It is an act of blasphemy. If you do not submit, if you do not dress the way they want, if you do not think the way they want, and if you're not just a baby machine for the theocracy. So in a sense, I can't see how people who are progressive, people who are left, cannot see the similarities of a Christian right movement and an Islamic right movement.
Yes.
They are the exact same. If they have differences in their effects on people's lives, it's more because of power imbalances rather than that one is better than the other.
Yes, I'm so glad you bring up the issue of theocracy, which of course we are fighting in this country, the increasing sense of theocracy. We just had a Southern Baptist convention, which is the largest Protestant denomination in this country of 13 million people. And they were using phrases against, quote, willfully childless women. Okay. Of course, gay marriage, etc. They are, very influential, and they now have a shot at actually pushing this country into more of a Christian nationalism. Mm-hmm. So it's a difference in religion. It is definitely a difference in the amount of enforcement, yes, and there is a definite difference when the religion does officially become the law of the land. But we are rapidly moving toward that, and some of that has already been enacted, such as the overturning of our reproductive rights, which feminists in this country fought so hard for. So there are many analogies there, and I agree with you. And yet there is this amnesia sometimes on the left, because Iran has instituted perhaps certain services for women, for mothers. They're not completely bereft of social services, but it's in a very narrow and very restrictive context. Do you agree with that description?
I think theocracy is just very bad news for people in general. Whatever the theocracy, if it's a Christian theocracy, an Islamic theocracy, a Buddhist theocracy, a Hindu theocracy, a Jewish theocracy, I think it's hugely detrimental to people's rights and lives. And Iran is no different. I mean, in Iran, a woman's testimony is worth half that of a man's. Women cannot, for example, be judges because they're deemed to be too emotional. They cannot study certain fields because, they're women. It's not meant for them. They can't travel without the permission of a male guardian. They can't work without the permission of a male guardian. Child marriage is acceptable because from puberty onwards, you wear the hijab and you're no longer considered a child. Girls get half the inheritance of boys, and on and on and on. I mean, you cannot fathom that anything can be positive for women under any circumstances in a theocracy. And I think, this idea that my enemy's enemy is my friend is like me saying, because I'm against the Islamic regime of Iran, I am going to support Trump no matter what. I am going to support his anti-women rules. I am going to support the fact that he's a rapist. I am going to support the fact that he is arresting immigrants, documented or undocumented, off the streets and deporting people because they have a meme of J.D. Vance and so on and so on. This makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. It is not just a lack of human decency, a lack of any sort of morality and ethics. It's also doesn't have any respect for human beings that are considered other. So you are fighting for this left, and I'm a worker communist myself. You are fighting for the right to abortion for women in the United States. You are fighting for gay rights and gay marriage. You are fighting for the rights of people not to be arrested because they don't have documents and deported and treated like animals, children and families being separated. But you are willing to support that in another country because they are deemed lesser than you. Are people subhuman? Do they not have the same rights as you? How can you in any way, shape and form defend these rights when it comes to white people and yourselves, and have no respect for those rights when it comes to the other, those who live in the Middle East, those who live in Iran, those who live in Afghanistan. How dare you? It is a morally bankrupt position to have. And I think it goes back also to this idea of identity politics. You know, people are boxed into specific identities. Everyone in Iran is Muslim, and it always happens to minorities. We are incapable of having dissenters and communists and socialists and free thinkers and people who want rights and who demand rights, and particularly if you look at the Iranian regime, I mean, it is one of the most anti-working class, it built its regime on the murder of leftists in that country. Through the suppression of leftists, there are mass graves in Iran where leftists have been buried during the 80s, the bloody decade, in order for this regime to take power. To celebrate May 1st, International Workers' Day, is a crime in Iran. Workers are flogged for doing that. And you are telling me that you're going to defend that capitalist authoritarian regime against your capitalist, increasingly authoritarian regime. I'm sorry, that's the only thing I can say.
I think that's an incredibly important statement that you just made. And I think hopefully it will be heard as a corrective by those on the left who are succumbing to, which seems to be a kind of norm in any time of war, where the propaganda becomes, we are the good ones and they are the evil ones. Or in the case of critics of the United States, we are evil, so there must be all good. And that is a simplistic and polarizing kind of thinking that as a leftist, I must be critical of my fellow leftists when they succumb to it. So I very much appreciate your statement, Maryam Namazie. As we come to an end of this, is there anything else you'd like to say in terms of what we can all do to, one, stop this war, and two, go back to what has been the traditional and classic and correct leftist position, is being for the separation of church and state. I mean, that's even a liberal position in this country. That's an important position. How do we keep sorting it out, and what do you think we need to do to stop this irrational horror of war and to fight against these authoritarian and theocratic regimes that in different ways both countries are facing?
I think you can see how quickly things can change. It's the same that, for example, what happened in Iran, how quickly, of course, the Shah's regime was a dictatorship, but I'm talking about during the revolutionary period. It was a period of openness and real hope. And
excuse me, let me just interject. When you talk about the revolutionary period, could you
the Iranian
pinpoint?
Revolution of 1979? It was a real period of hope and of this attempt to change society for the better, and how quickly the Islamic movement, which, by the way, those with historical amnesia forget that the Islamic movement was brought to center stage because of U.S. foreign policy during the Cold War. Islamists were seen to be an ally in the fight against communist Russia. And if you remember, at the time, the U.S., for example, armed and trained the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, and in Guadeloupe, they decided that they prefer an Islamic regime in Iran because it would be a good, useful green belt, an Islamic belt around the Soviet Union. And therefore, even in Iran, when there was the 1979 Iranian Revolution, it wasn't an Islamic revolution. The revolution was suppressed by the Islamic movement. So I think we have to remember these things when we are siding with one totalitarian force against others who are committing genocide and crimes against humanity. I think the more principled position is to say we won't stand with either. We want an end to war. We won't stand with a genocidal regime like that of Israel. We won't stand with an imperialist force like the United States and its allies. We won't stand with the Islamists, the Islamic regime of Iran, Hamas, Hezbollah, Russia. We will stand with people. And I think until we make a distinction between the ruling class and the population at large, which is being killed by war, by oppression, by authoritarianism, we're never going to be able to move forward. We need old-fashioned solidarity with people, with working class movements, with liberation movements, and against all capitalist authoritarian states that are making this world a living hell for the vast majority of people.
Thank you very, very much for this statement, Maryam Namazie. You have been a fighter for these positions for many, many years. You have a wonderful following. How can people get in touch with your writings and your work?
If they just do a search of my name, Maryam Namazie, I'm on social media, and my email is just maryamnamazie@gmail.com.
Let's spell that out.
So it's M for Mary, ARYA, M for Mary, N for Nancy, A-M for Mary, AZIE @gmail.com.
Okay, Maryam Namazie. Your words are inspirational, and they give us a path. They give us an important path about how to think about all of this. And I thank you so much for this interview. I know I will keep track of your work, and I hope our listeners will also. Thank you again.
Thank you for having me and giving me the opportunity as well, Fran, as always.
جوانه میزنم به روی زخم بر تنم، فقط به حکم بودنم که من زنم چو هم صدا شویم و پا به پای هم رویم و دست به دست هم نهیم و از ستم رها شویم، جهان دیگری بسازیم از برابری، به همدلی و خواهری، جهان شاد و بهتری، نه سنگ و سارها، نه پای چوب دارها، نه گریه های بارها، نه ننگارها، جهان دیگری بسازیم از برابری، به همدلی و خواهری، جهان شاد و بهتری.
And you are listening to The Joy of Resistance, multicultural feminist radio at WBAI, which is at 99.5 FM and streams at WBAI.org. We come to you every Thursday at 11 a.m. and we bring you frontline news and analysis from a feminist perspective, with a lot of history and context also thrown in. We just heard an interview with Maryam Namazie, a renowned human rights activist. I think a very inspirational interview. I want to clarify one thing. She uses the word Islamist as something that she is fighting. She does not mean the practice of the religion of Islam. What she means is what in her in her part of the world, her kind of group that is critical of the Iranian theocratic regime. What they mean is when Islam tries to take over a country, that is its laws. In other words, it becomes a theocracy and religious law becomes what everyone must subscribe to. So I just wanted to clarify that point. That interview was followed just now by a song recorded in the Iran metro, the subway, on March 8th, 2018. And it is a group of women very boldly daring to sing on the subway a liberation song. It's known as Equality Song. And the words roughly are, some of the words are, Happy Women's Day. We speak with one voice. We do not, for a better world and a happier world. No more stoning, no more executions, no more crying again and again. And it has a great deal of spirit. If you want to actually see them singing, you can do that on YouTube by going to Equality Song Iran. It's, you can really see how nervous and excited they are to be doing that in public, which of course it was forbidden.